my God, the balloon! I guess you know by now that it happened 3 times during the Trump administration, but because the Trump administration was focused on its own navel and nobody thought to look up, nobody knew about it. But now that we all know about it, where is the screaming and belching and wheezing about the 3 spy balloons that went over the United States during the reign of the orange vomit? I don't think we're going to hear about that. I just don't. I really don't. Steve Schmidt, writing at his website, The Warning. This one is also at Substack, just like Popular Information. That's a good website, Substack.com. All kinds of good stuff to read there. But Steve points out that Marco is a member of what is known, just a little bit too cute for me, in the Congress, in the Senate. He's part of what's known as the Gang of 8. The Gang of 8. Didn't it have something to do with communist China after Mao died, and the Gang of 4, or was it 3, including Mao's widow, tried to take over the country? The Gang of 8. And Mario is a member of that Gang of 8 because he's the ranking member of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. The so-called 8 includes the leaders of both parties in the House and Senate, as well as the chairpersons and ranking minority members of the 2 intelligence committees. So there you have it, 2, 4, 6, 8, right? Now, if you watched any of the talk television over the weekend, you saw Marco Polo being interviewed on ABC News by Jonathan Karl. And Marco Rubio just couldn't stand it. He went off at length about the Chinese spy balloon that entered the United States, or American airspace, I should say. What were the reports? About 60,000 feet above Alaska. That's really up there when you get right down to it. What, 11 miles? After it crossed Alaska, it crossed Canada. I didn't hear any of the members of Parliament in Canada wetting themselves over this thing like we had the Christian fascists in this country, but I digress. And then the balloon, after traversing a part of Canada, crossed the lower 48. That's us. And then after it was just off the coast of South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, which is a very fun place to go in the summer, they shot it down, they being a couple of, I don't know, maybe Navy pilots or Army or Air Force. Anyway, the U.S. military shot it down. No incident. And that shoot down came on the order of President Biden. Now, one of the reasons that Biden waited as long as he did to shoot it down was for the safety of the American people. You have to remember, always remember this, that Christian fascists do not give a tinker's damn about the safety of the American people. They can't think like that. And Marco Rubio is one of the key leaders of the Christian terrorist movement in this country. So he, along with other Christian fascists, when this balloon was spotted, were screaming and yelling about Biden should shoot it down, shoot it down, shoot it down, with no regard to where the chunks and pieces, you know, what the debris field would be, I believe is the proper term, and whether or not people would be hurt. It doesn't matter to Christian fascists. Now, there's something that Steve points out in his piece, and I fully agree. Very few people have any memory of this bullshit 6 months from now. I mean, really. And in addition, a balloon? Come on, China is about to land people on the moon. The last thing I read a couple of months ago, they're preparing a moon shot, you might say. Oh boy. It's a spacefaring nation, China is. It has its own sophisticated fleet of spy satellites like we have, like Russia has, like so many countries have now. And everybody spies on everybody, but they don't use balloons. Okay? So Marco Polo Rubio believes the balloon was a deliberate provocation aimed at showing the world that America is a decaying superpower that will never meet its treaty obligations. And where in the hell is Hunter Biden's laptop? Was it inside the balloon? And America will never defend Taiwan, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, or a partridge in a pear tree. No, never. And the proof of this that Marco Polo Rubio offers, well, it's in the helplessness of America as the balloon floated idly overhead. Now, this punk-ass Marco Rubio, his position seems to be nailed to the idea, or his pretending that the balloon wasn't actually shot down. That'll be the next thing. That'll be the next thing. It was never shot down. That was a fake video. Oh my God, these people. Now, when Marco Polo Rubio was on ABC with Jonathan Karl, since he's the ranking member, that means minority member of the Intelligence Committee, he could have talked about the dedication of, here's one, Camp Blaze, B-L-A-Z, on Guam. That is the first new U.S. Marine Corps base in 70 years within fighting distance of Taiwan. And it supports 5,000 Marines. Okay. He could have talked about the Japanese doubling their military spending at the kick in the ass by the United States. Marco Polo could have talked about the Philippines expanding the capabilities of the U.S. Navy to operate in the Western Pacific, because the Philippines are allowing the establishment of 9 new bases, naval bases, to counter the threat of Chinese aggression. We are never the aggressor. Don't even get hung up on that. Okay. Now, that's what Marco Polo could have talked about instead of this effing balloon. Now, he also could have talked about the staggering Chinese naval arms race that has created a fleet that now has more warships than the U.S. Navy. Oh, my God. Now, of course, it's a fleet that's far less capable than the U.S. Navy, but if you're going to go by raw numbers, well, we're number two. Marco Polo could have talked about the vulnerability of a U.S. fleet carrier to a precision hypersonic missile fired from, I don't know where, Kamchatka maybe? Don't the Russians claim they have hypersonic missiles? And he could have questioned whether the age, the age of using an aircraft carrier is probably over, don't you think? If you consider the enormous capacity for staggering casualties that exist on an aircraft carrier. I mean, there are thousands of sailors and Marines on an aircraft carrier. One of those vessels hit by a hypersonic or supersonic or any kind of a missile, the death toll would be staggering. Now, Marco Polo Rubio, as Steve points out, also could have talked about the Chinese submarine program, or the fact that the Chinese have what is called an out-of-control espionage operation in the United States. But Marco Rubio chose to do none of those things, bring up none of those topics. The little shit decided instead to choose fear-mongering over a balloon. Okay, at this point I have to pause for a sip of River Moon coffee, please. Thank you very much. Now, Rubio was also talking about the decline of the United States. We're our decaying superpower. We are declining. Well, maybe the decline that this little shit was talking about can be seen about within what Rubio was talking about. Maybe the decline that Rubio was talking about is that the Chinese are watching our political and media decline, of which Marco Polo Rubio is a huge part. Maybe the function of the balloon was so the Chinese, they wanted to see the stupidity play out second by second in this country, as Steve puts it, like an MRI scanning a body injected with contrast dye. And maybe they wanted to settle an internal Chinese debate between two factions of who observe America, who spy on America, who make policy decisions on this country, who disagreed on how we would respond. One thing for sure, as Steve points out, whatever side in China bet on stupid, won big. You know what I shudder to think about? Chunks of human waste like Marco Polo Rubio and Jim Jordan and McCarthy and the rest of these people, they are in control to some degree, and in some instances a very large degree, of our national security, our national intelligence, which Trump wanted to turn over to the Russians and still does. So anyway, the stupidity, the silliness, the asininity of Marco Rubio and scum like him in the Senate were exposed by the balloon. And as Steve Schmidt points out, these cretins in our Senate absolutely demonstrated a lack of capacity to measure up in a real crisis. And they also demanded a response that will give the Chinese a chance to reciprocate the favor. That happened in 2001, in the months before 9/11. And like now, the event was regarded as a distraction. But was it? Steve points this out. The Western Pacific would be the battleground for the largest naval action since World War II if the Chinese invade Taiwan. We don't want to think about this. We really don't, because it would mean the Chinese Navy and the U.S. Navy would be engaged in a short, violent, apocalyptic confrontation at sea before the matter escalated or calmed. It's not going to involve balloons if that happened. And as Steve points out, that is or should be the main point. Not to little whiny weasels like Marco Rubio Polo, whatever the hell his name is, and the rest of these slime. Did you see the parade of these Christian fascists? They could not wait to get to a microphone and a camera to talk about, well, Joe Biden's not a leader. Well, look what's choking on their own bile and vomit to get the words out. So once again, where it concerns Marco Rubio, a serious matter, this balloon floating over U.S. territory, a serious matter has been taken and twisted into little chunks of imbecility by an American politician, Marco Rubio, who routinely lies, talks shit, accuses opponents of being enemies, while treating adversaries with delusion and disregard, Steve Smith says. So one conclusion that you can probably draw from this regarding Marco Polo Rubio, he must astound the Chinese government. And I'm sure that government can't imagine that Marco Rubio would be a person who leads a committee on which the most sensitive secrets of this country are required to be disclosed. Think about that. I mean, I can't think about it. I get, well, weird if I think about that. People like Marco Rubio, on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So, as Steve says, no doubt the Chinese won't be the first to be amazed that in America anything is possible. And I might add, even allowing dork jokes like Marco Rubio access to the intelligence gathered by U.S. intelligence agencies. Steve closes with this. Sometimes politics feels like a reality show. When it does, it's important to remember that it is. And that on any given day, it's the dumbest show on television by far. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.